Education.
Where we start?
This time I'll call the second budget workshop to order. And tonight we'll start at the Beaufort County Public School System. Brian, you got any comments?
Just a couple. There's some information from the last meeting that you had some questions about. We provided you some additional paperwork at your desk. So just real quickly, I want to kind of run through that so you'll know what it is, so you can reference it when you need to. There's information, there was a question, Chairman Waters asked about the different values, what numbers we use for retirement and law enforcement. So you'll see the community college piece. And of course, theirs is a little bit different because they're under teasers instead of Elders. We're under Elders, the local government retirement. They're under teachers and state employees. So you see that breakdown. Then you'll see the SRO salary and piece that shows the Elders, and then the LEO, the 5% that goes to supplemental retirement. There was a question from the chairman about turnover in the department. So you'll see a spreadsheet that shows 2017 employee turnover by department and the percentages on that. There was a question about the USDA loan from the last meeting. You'll see an email that came from Anita regarding that, where she had a conversation with the USDA area specialist regarding that, and that yes, you can refinance it. The issue is there's no prepayment penalty on it. But we've still got 25 years on that loan. It would be difficult for us to be able to get a local bank to do anything over 15 years. And also, one of the issues that you're seeing with the banks now, with the change in the tax structure that the feds did, local government financing is just not as beneficial for them anymore. There's a bigger break on it, tax-free, tax-exempt financing. So there's that. There's also a detail, I think the chairman asked for the detail about the maintenance and building work, the $342,000 that was in that budget. So this breaks it out and shows you where that work is and what it's related to. Commissioner Richardson asked about the sheriff's office and their vehicles. So you'll see their vehicle sheet that they have, and if you look at my assumption is, and Charlie will certainly be able to talk to that, you'll see the very dark ones where they show vehicles in excess of, I think the lowest there is about 124,000 miles, and this was in February. I assume the ones they're looking to replace out of the 7, and then 7 replacements, and then the jail transport van. So, but Charlie can certainly speak to that, but that's that list. And then there was a question about, I think Commissioner Richardson also asked about the capital of the school system, the Beaufort County school system, and you have that. They gave that to you. This is a second copy. You actually got a copy, I think. You may still have it from the joint board meeting. But so you have that. So those are all, that's all the paperwork I think we owe you from the last meeting. Any further questions relating to that? We also emailed you a copy of the revenue neutral spreadsheet, so you could go in and look at the formulas on that if you wanted to. And I emailed all of you copies of the PowerPoint presentation for both the spreadsheet and the presentation. So I think you have everything. If there's something we're missing from the last meeting or from the budget presentation, please let us know. We'll get it for you.
I think that answered everybody's questions.
Well, let me elaborate on the community college financing that building. We're paying over $100,000 a year in interest for that financing, and we're only paying $74,000 toward the principal. There's not a prepayment penalty. We should take a look at putting some money into that to reduce the number of years on the life of the mortgage.
And you can do that. I mean, you just have to
That's all I
decide.
want to do. I don't want to refinance it because you got a good rate, a good term and all that. If there's not a prepayment penalty, then for a few dollars, you can cut 10 years off the mortgage life.
Well, you'd have to find a revenue stream to do that, and then unless you just want to make a lump sum payment against it out of fund balance. But I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying.
It would increase the budget, but it would also save us 10 years of mortgage payments.
How much is left on that loan?
2.7 million.
Because you pay $500,000 on that, you'll probably cut 10 years off the life of the mortgage. Anybody, you guys ever look at mortgage schedules?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when you start off, all your money's going to interest. It
That,
takes you years and years and years to get where, and that's what's happening on this deal out here, and you got money sitting in the bank, so why not take some of that money and whack 10 years off the mortgage real quick?
What are you talking about, $1 million or?
Maybe $500,000 would do it. In the early years, you're only paying $74,000 toward the principal. So if you took $500,000, would easily cut off 6 years.
Could you get us a rate schedule on that and see what it looks like?
I was under the impression that it was a 40-year loan, but it must have been a 30-year
It is a 30-year loan.
30-year loan.
Yes.
I don't, if I remember correctly, when the college was discussing it maybe a couple years ago, I don't think there's any prepayment penalties on it.
No, there's not. She confirmed that
Yeah.
with what she gave us today. There are no prepayment penalties.
All right. Brian?
So we're starting on page 123, which is with the school system. They were notified, not sure. Anyway, we'll run through it. What we did with the school system this year was we held them flat with last year's budget. They're back on a cash capital mechanism. As you remember, last year we financed part of that. We converted that this year to cash. So all of theirs is, instead of a portion of it being financed, all of it is cash. So the overall current expense is $14.587 million and then 1.115 in capital. 15.7 million, which is what they received last year, and that's where we held them at this year. You see their information they provided. You also have a copy of their capital spreadsheet. There is a service expansion in the back of your book that we'll get to tomorrow that talks about that. We've shown you a piece where if you were to take a penny and add it to the tax rate and dedicate that penny to school security issues, you could take what they're showing in their 5-year capital plan for security, do it in about 3 years, and then take that extra penny and then dedicate it completely to school capital if you wanted to. But that's in your service expansion for you to think about tomorrow. I really don't have any other pieces for you. They did request, in their request this year, they actually requested $14.89 million, and they requested a little over $2 million in capital. So it was an increase from what they received last year of $1.2 million, which is about 7.72% increase from last year. But we didn't see a way in which we could, in the existing budget, handle that without holding them flat. Overall, as you're aware, we're taking our budget down 2%, and we've asked all our departments to hold it steady. And so we're taking that tact with our outside agencies as well.
I got a question.
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Blue, restroom facilities at the athletic
No.
complex at Washington High
No,
School.
we're not on that. We're on
I
public
know
school.
that, but I just wanted to get that question answered.
For,
It's on page 5.
on page 5,
About,
it says restroom facilities at the athletic complex,
yeah.
$75,000.
You know anything about that?
That's not in the request this year. That's in the 2 to 5 year.
I think you're talking about community college, and you guys are talking about the schools,
Yes.
public schools.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm thinking.
But it's in, I mean,
Got confused.
it's in the, their 5-year plan, but it's
Yeah.
not in the current budget request.
Actually, it's in their estimate, total estimated cost, it's out, it is in the out year. They're only showing 20,000 under athletics in the current request to repair a track at Southside High School. And 1718 said funded 40,000 on that.
So, Brian?
Yes,
So
sir.
you're recommending flat on the schools?
Yes, sir.
Public schools?
Yes, sir. We are.
So what they're asking for is not in here.
Yes, sir. They've asked for $1.2 million additional to what they got last year, and we simply don't have that without you guys doing something. Yeah.
So
I
any
can't find that.
increases in physical security or SROs is going to take a tax increase?
It would take an additional revenue stream, yes, sir.
Or since it relates to capital, they could change their priority. I mean, basically, what, they're asking for $2 million in capital.
Correct.
And your budget here shows $1,115,000.
Yes, sir.
For capital.
Yes, sir. And if you'll look on their capital sheet, you'll see where their numbers come from.
Well, one of the things that we have always required the schools to do on the capital budget, even though they want that, we've said, when we give you this 1.15, what are you actually going to do? That becomes a part of the budget, because we've had problems in the past with laying out a lump sum of money. You've got a new superintendent coming, you don't know what he's going to be like, and they switch these projects around. And the most famous example of that was roofs. Every year was money for roofs, money for roofs. The roofs never got repaired, but then they come in after so many years and start screaming that the roofs have to be repaired. And you said, well, we gave you the money, what did you do with it? Oh, we spent it for something else. So we've had a tight leash on capital spending in the schools for a long time. And I want to see the schools bring us a list of what they're going to buy with the 1.15 million, what they think is important. Because it's an open door if you do it any other way.
I would like to see the same thing. And so I think if you reach out to Don and just tell him that, that's where the commissioners are at this point in time, and based on their capital needs, what would be the priorities that they would try to tackle with that budget? Is that fair enough?
Yeah, and that becomes a part of the budget ordinance, and I don't know how we've been paying this lately. It hasn't been a problem. Dr. Phipps has straightened a lot of things with that out, but this is where we had periodic updates on the capital budget as to where they were.
Well, they're doing it by line item now,
It
aren't
seemed
they,
like we
Brian?
had this conversation about 3 years ago, then,
Well, we did it up till about 3 years ago. That's what we did. But you got a new superintendent coming, and I'm concerned that this 1.15 million can be spent for anything that's on this list, is what they were doing in the past. And sometimes they spent it for things that weren't on the list.
Brian,
Sir.
in the way they've been spending is by line item.
You have been appropriating them capital and current expense.
By item.
Last year you did because we had to look at what were 10-year expenses that could be financed. And they essentially, last year they came back to you and said, we went in initially and said, well, this one works, this one doesn't, this one does. And then we went back to them, and I think they came back to y'all and said, okay, these are the things we're
Yeah, well,
going
they're
to
gonna
do
spend
with the money, which is the same request this year, and that's certainly doable for them.
Any other questions on the school budget? Okay, Brian?
And Dr. Loop is here tonight. We'll tell you that the one thing we did with their budget was, and they did a great job, their budget was actually a little bit lower. We actually took their budget, the only thing that we took out of their budget was the school, the additional police officer. And the reason we did that, we pulled that out of their budget and put it in as a service expansion. And the reason we did that was because there were requests for SROs at all the other schools as well. So what we wanted to do was pull that out as a service expansion and let you deal with all that school security piece, whether it be the community college or whether it be the schools, on its own instead of putting one in with additional funding. Y'all need to make that decision. So otherwise, their budget is pretty much as they presented. So, but I'll let Dr. Lee answer any questions you
Did
may
you
have.
hear any more on whether the state's gonna fund any of that money or not?
Don't know. I mean, what I heard from Joanna Reese was, they've only gotten one piece out yet. They're still waiting on the Senate's piece, so they really don't know yet.
And as we discussed at the last meeting, it's $18,000 per county.
If it goes by county. Well, initially, I mean,
Up by a car.
they're saying $1.8 million is what the House is saying add to the grant program for SROs. We don't know where that's going to shake out at.
Yeah, but if the House is putting 1.8 million, the Senate may go a little higher, but they're not going to go more than $18,000 per. Like I said, can we get a call for that, Jake?
Well, that was grant money. I mean, it was,
That's right, it is grant
so
program.
apparently you would have to apply for it.
You might not get
And we do
none.
that right now. We do that right now.
That's something, okay.
There's some SRO grant funding that we apply for with the state, or the school applies for. So,
Now, I have one question, Mike.
Yes.
So what we're looking at between the college and the public schools is 7 officers?
you would look at, yes.
You want
It was-
one for every
If
school?
you wanted one for every school, it was 6 in the public schools and then one additional at the community college to put them in the building where the early
Apparently,
college is.
having an SRO at Washington High School the other day helped a lot.
I think having SROs helps. I mean,
Well, they recovered a firearm.
Charlie may be able to speak to that a little bit.
There's not a metal detector, is there, Charlie?
The only metal detectors in the high schools would be
Wands.
wands. We use them in some of the larger sporting events.
Do we have any metal detectors at any of the 14 schools?
Not that are structures. We just have the wands that can move from place to place.
I still like to have some hard numbers on having your own setup for SRO officers, all 14 or 15, whatever it is. I mean, I know she sent me some information the other day, and I was looking at it here. And when I was saying the total package, I didn't see cars or anything in here. I wanted the total package and see if we had our own, if we would do our own SRO officers, take all 14 of them, just let them do ball game security and SRO work. That's,
I think you pretty well have some comparison when you look at the one at the community college versus the.
they still don't have a car for the community college. We need, in order to see if it's efficient, we need the whole thing. I mean, it's a community college, you got $62,000 here. With $62,000, you don't have nowhere for a car. You got to have a car.
Well,
Yes.
If you-
I don't think Dr. Loop's asking for a car in his.
No, I'm saying if you have an SRO officer, in his, you got $62,000 and there's no car in it.
Correct.
But if you got one in each school, they're gonna have to have a car.
that's in the school budget in the expansion.
That's in the expansion
Yeah,
for
that's
a
in the
car.
expansion.
So the 57,000 per employee, 52,000 I think it was.
57,815,
57.
just salary and
Just salary.
benefits for a county
For
SRO.
a county SRO.
And if we need to add a vehicle to that, we would add 35,000.
I think our
Estimation was about 95,000 to 100,000 per SRO, per
first
school, the
year.
first year.
year.
But-
First year.
Well, that's the numbers I like to look at. See, if we just take our,
What would it drop off to after that first year?
Then it would, the equipment and the vehicles, we could maintain in the normal budget cycle the way that we would go, and then it would be the salary and benefits. So right at that 57,000 to 60,000 per year would be the
It's in the expansion if you've gotten that far.
but what I'm saying,
There's a sheet in there.
if you got SRO officers that, at each school, you don't have to have those charges. You don't have to have a car every 3 years. They can just use them for schools. That's the part I was looking at. Just have your own department.
Oh, you're talking about, okay, and we'd have to have some conversations with somebody who would be able to help us be able to set up something like
Okay.
that. I don't know the ins and outs of that. I know that right now, if you put them under the sheriff's office, they're covered. They're not an additional law enforcement agency. I think what you're referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, is a separate
Yes.
agency underneath the school system?
Yes.
Is what you're looking for? Okay.
Look at the numbers, see what's the difference in the numbers. I mean, it might not be feasible.
And again, I don't know the logistics of that, whether, I'm assuming that if you had a program like that, it would be structured similar to the way you would have it at the sheriff's office, because I would, and again, this is my assumption, is that if there was an incident that occurred at the school and that student needed to go somewhere, that officer would be responsible for transporting that student instead of calling somebody.
Yes.
So that group would also need some type of vehicle as well, I would think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but they wouldn't need chargers.
Oh, okay. I see
I
what you're
don't
saying.
think they would need chargers. You could put them on a K car or something. I'm not, I'm trying to see the difference in the numbers since money is crunch. Because if you got to expand SRO officers to each school, they got to be there 8 hours a day, or something before, longer. And I was just trying to get the difference in the numbers of having our own setup versus going through them.
I mean, the salary and benefits would be the same essentially. They would come in our pay plan at the same rate with the same benefits, whether they're under the sheriff's office or in a county
Why?
department, I would say.
My question, and I don't mean to jump off the topic with you, but I would look to Charlie, to ask Charlie, how would that occur? Could you even do that? From my perspective, you could do that if you engaged a private security firm, but I'm not sure that the school, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman?
There's a
School
private police
systems-
law in North
Well, I
Carolina.
know there's a private police
What's-
law, but can the school system?
Some agencies, some counties are doing it, aren't they?
There's one, I think there's one
Yeah.
county that's
I
doing
mean,
it.
why is we different from Alexander County?
Charlie, are you familiar with any of those?
I'm not sure. I think, what it seems like it's being described would be company police. Something like the force that Vidant would have, where they still are sworn and still have standards through criminal justice training and standards. But it would be under a company police with limited jurisdiction.
And it might not be any cheaper. I just like to see the numbers.
I can promise you, it's not going to be less expensive than the service that's provided by the county or through the sheriff's office.
Commissioner Evans?
Why would we not go under the sheriff's department for this security? I mean, they got the expertise, something goes down, they're all singing the same song, they know the hymnal, they know how to respond together. And we've tried the private vendor, and I just don't understand why we wouldn't all be under the same umbrella where these guys could rotate around and
But I was looking at the cost effective of it. I mean, there's some days in schools that you don't have a resource officer. And there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I mean, but it's looking at the cost. I mean, you'll pay, if you got a resource officer, he can still do basketball game security, he can still do football games, he's there. I mean, if there's other counties that's looking at it also, and maybe it's not cost effective for us.
I'd start out with the sheriff making a proposal to us.
He got a
The football.
proposal.
Okay?
The sheriff they're doing it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got it in the expansion
Right.
budget. We've got
I've seen it
cost.
in there, but I just,
I was trying to put the numbers together, soft costs and all that.
But I think one of the things you have to need to look at is not only a cost issue, but a training issue, how well they're trained, how would they react to a situation. You still have to be extremely careful what caliber individual that you're bringing on board to handle. But you may be putting them in a situation where there's, they have to take somebody down, and then you want somebody who's been involved or has been trained to handle situations such as that. So to me, it's more of a cost situation. And I think what Chief is saying, it'd cost us about the same or even more money.
Then stay with it.
But it's something to look at. I agree.
Yeah, stay with it. If he's right, stay
Commissioner
with it.
Commissioner Langley?
We'll be glad to pull that together. I think Allied Universal can give us that information. They would provide company police in that.
The only negative I see is having the officers dedicated to the school. I mean, because basically any officer under the sheriff, if he wants them to go somewhere else, he can snatch him and move them elsewhere. And so my only concern would be is that those officers not to be pulled away from the schools to do other things, other functions within the sheriff's department. That would be my only concern.
And I'm not able to speak to that. Charlie,
I understand that.
Charlie can speak to that if there's,
I'm just putting that out there.
yes, sir.
It appears we've gone from Beaufort County Schools kind of right over to the college.
I think we went to the college and we came back to the schools again.
And we may have just touched on the sheriff's office.
Let me be the first one to say we're glad you're here. Congratulations to your
Thank you, Mark.
coming to your first budget workshop.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here and appreciate all the support the commission's given us and the county's given us through the years. Yeah, I think that for us, the most important thing moving into the next year is to try to enhance the security, especially around early college, high school. We're increasing the enrollment of early college from roughly 235 to about 290 going into the next year. The other thing is when you've got a mass of students in one place most of the day, that is a place that's, in my mind, vulnerable, and it's a place where we need additional help with respect to law enforcement. And so the reason we're asking for a separate officer is truthfully because we need somebody, I would like somebody to be there dealing with early college, high school students in the two buildings that they're on at the campus, Building 5, Building 10, all day long, every day. And it's not easy for us to do that with the force we have in place, who are out and about. And I have to give kudos to Chief Alligood, Todd Alligood, who's our new chief, is a lot more vigilant. We just had an active shooter tabletop exercise last week where Charlie was there and a number of other folks. We're trying to take this very seriously. There are issues. I don't want to restart the computer right now, but it's giving me options to do so. Brian, you have any ideas? In any case, what we're looking to do is to shore up the physical infrastructure within Building 5 where most of the middle college is located. That building was originally designed basically as a warehouse with a library upstairs. And we put the early college rather, in the bottom floor and put in partition walls essentially where there's no external egress from some of these rooms. Thank you, ma'am. And we've got to do something about that just to make sure that there are other exit points from within that building. It's sort of like a rabbit's warren down there, quite frankly. And we've got to do something to open that up. We've got a situation where we've got hollow doors that are down there because this space was not really designed as a high school space originally. We need external security to prevent people from getting into the building to begin with. It's a relatively confined space. We've already locked off doors that are unnecessary, so you cannot get in from the outside. And if somebody goes out from the inside, it alarms. But what we need is to have something like other schools have, where there is a card key entrance to get in the front of the building, for one thing. The other thing we desperately need, I think, down there is some additional protection for Emily Paik, who is the principal. Her comment to me was, well, I can see somebody coming across the courtyard with a rifle because I've got full window coverage in the front of my building, but after that, there's not a whole lot I can do. So what we really want to be able to do is to either put up a bulletproof glass down on that area, which would then also extend to where the doors are and would be card key access. but also maybe brick up part of that glass wall that's downstairs. We also have direct access from the library, which is upstairs, which is of course an open space. Members of the general public are in and out of there all the time. We've got to have tighter control of who gets in down the stairs to that early college facility than we've got now. So together, all of those things, we're asking for about another $40,000 to be able to do that. So it's not a large sum of money to, I think, affect a great deal of enhanced security for that particular building. The other thing that makes me concerned, and there aren't many things that keep me up at night, but one of them is the security in those two buildings. And especially when you see what we all see on the news on a regular basis, whereas someone comes into a place where it's, pardon the expression, but almost a shooting gallery, where there are targets everywhere, that we have not only those measures that prevent people from getting in, but a police officer, an armed police officer, who is there in that building and cycling back and forth between it and the other building next door, Building 10, where we also hold the majority of the remaining early college classes. I really want to have an officer stationed there full-time during the course of the day, and that's why we're asking for for this additional officer, which we hope would fall under the chief of police at the college. We don't need another car. We've got vehicles for use around campus. But I think for command control purposes, I think it would be a better fit for us to have one of our own sworn officers who's there. And so that accounts for the about 62.9 that we're looking for another police officer. If you look at what we're asking for next year, it's about a 1.9% increase, and it's all operating essentially in terms of the increase. 91% increase in operating and $37,000 decrease in capital. And of course, most of that money going for the operating is for the new officer, along with salaries, benefits, which do differ a little bit from the sheriff's department because of the requirements for the state retirement that go along with that. And also that we're looking for a slight increase in cost of living and some other benefits, and an increase in anticipated cost for insurance and contracted services. In terms of what we're asking for on the capital side, we're going to continue with the minor improvements that we're asking for. We're not asking for anything major in the coming year. Mostly we're going to continue with the air conditioner updates in particular. So those come under the minor maintenance items of $156,000. You'll see there on the following page the minor maintenance breakdown. 40 grand is upfront what we're asking for the early college, high school renovation, security upgrades, HVAC replacements there as well. We're trying to go to LED exterior lights on the campus. When I got there, every night of the week, the lights were off. It was pitch black. I know that may save money, but in my estimation, you are asking for trouble when you've got a pitch black campus, and you have the possibility for crimes taking place there. It'd be a good place to be for all sorts of possible things that could go wrong, whether it's break-ins, drug deals, or what have you. So we're trying to switch to LED exterior lights to save some money to keep the lights on more often around campus, and some classroom upgrades as well, especially in our modified computer labs, which we increasingly have to use from an instructional standpoint. Again, I said no major capital items at this time. Got some equipment needs as well. Something additional on our voiced over IP communication systems. And then the remainder of that's about 62 grand. We're asking to replace some of our campus vehicles. I had the misfortune of taking one of our campus vehicles out to deliver poinsettias back around December, and we got up on North Market a ways and out, and Gallbush and out that way, and it started chugging along. I wasn't sure we were going to make it back. So I know you hear these sob stories all the time, but you get to hear mine too. So if you look at our vehicles, I mean, our folks use these things every day, and some of these vehicles are getting up and kind of long in the tooth, and 166,000 miles, 142, 133. So we are asking for some replacements there, and for a couple of our vehicles. That's pretty much all we're asking for this year. Be glad to answer any questions for you. Jason Squires, our facilities director, is here as well. I can answer it. He can help me out.
The numbers for the security, the 41,000, are you comfortable that will take care of all your needs?
We think so. Yeah, Jason, I mean, I think Jason's the one who actually worked on putting those together with Mark, the numbers on what it would cost to either brick in or put in the bulletproof glass downstairs for Ms. Pake's office in that area, and also to put in the external security upgrades. Like I say, we've locked off on most of the other doors in that building. But we're also going to need a roll-down door, I know, coming from upstairs and things of that sort. That should be able to handle, we estimate that should be able to handle it for us. And we want to get it done this summer before they come back in August.
So the keypad was included too in that keypad?
Yes, sir. That's the external key swipe to get in. Yeah, we're not asking for metal detectors at this time.
Jason,
Yes, sir.
welcome. You've been with the college now less than 6 months, or
No, so I started last July, so getting close to a year.
okay, close to a year.
Yes, sir.
He's a fine addition. He's a good man.
I'm sorry.
Can we go through each item, like key control or upgrades, physical security, the officer? Come over to total cost? What you're looking
Yes, sir. Which ones do you want to
Well,
start
just-
with?
I want to know what the total cost, it's for the.
The total cost for the operating was $91,500. So that includes the salary, benefits, equipment need for the new officer, as well as the increases to cost of living and the contracted services increase. So that's actually up about 3.64% from last year. On the capital side, our minor adjustments to HVAC and so forth are about $19,000 less. No major requests. Maintenance is fine. And in terms of a decrease anyway, we're still asking for $25,000 in maintenance equipment. The admin and communications equipments for the voice over IP telephone system, which our computer system is also hooked through. And we're also having to update that whole system, the money that the college has from its own budget to be able to deal with changes in Wi-Fi on campus, because we're having to update that. The remaining is $62,000 in the motor vehicles line, which is a little less than last year.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm sorry, we had part of that in our book, and then the other part was in the handout that you gave us when we had the joint meeting at the college, so
Correct, okay.
if anybody needs a copy of that,
Yeah,
that's the breakdown at the bottom and then over on the next page.
right, and just to clarify, we didn't take anything out of their capital budget. What they requested, we put in. The only thing we took out was out of the current expense, and that was the SRO, or the security officer, the police officer. And we moved that into a service expansion for you to consider that in your service expansion. But everything else is the same that they presented.
Wait, one more question on the officers that you have there. They do have the ability to arrest?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
They're fully sworn. Yep. And I can tell you, having worked on a campus that had private security in the past, one of which was sworn and carried weapons, and one which did not carry weapons, I feel a whole lot safer every day knowing that I've got somebody walking around that's sworn and carries a weapon, and who could be there in a matter of minutes.
Anyone else have any questions? If not, thank you and Jason for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Ryan, you want to introduce our next speaker?
Chief Deputy Charlie Rose. Starting on page 131.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, appreciate the opportunity once again to be here. And this is the fourth budget that I've helped put together and then present to the board and then defend through the process. So I take pleasure in that, the entire process, and each year I do grow in my appreciation for all of the decisions that have to be made. I know that all of you gentlemen see me at a lot of meetings that I know in the past you've asked why would he be here? Why would he be in this meeting? Well, I just figured that the more I understand and know about the entire county operation and understand that we all sort of reach into the same pot to try to fund each initiative, the more that I would know and learn about the entire process, the better off that I can be at trying to formulate the budget for the sheriff's office and to try to defend my priorities against where other priorities in the county may be. So I did want to get that out from the beginning. I do know that it is a tough situation that we're in, and I don't think it's ever going to be one of those years where we go, hey, the budget's going to be easy. But it is, each year has its own challenges. I know this year is going to be challenging as well. You'll see that over the course of the budgets that we're going to speak of, which is really, I consider them three different budgets. I don't consider the restricted funds for E911. They are so restricted that it's really tough to even negotiate and talk about. But that's four budgets, and then we do have a restricted fund with drug asset forfeiture money that we do talk about. So there's four different budgets that we consider and negotiate through the process. And I think that you'll see over the course of each of those that we've tried to do everything that we can to push down and smash down costs wherever we can. We knew that coming into this year that there was going to be some sources and some conversation about some expansion in personnel, and with that comes other costs that go along with that. But I believe that even you can see that as the personnel costs go up, that we try to push everything down, and as far as operations and other courses, to try to make it where that hurt is going to be minimized as opposed to being maximized. So now I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chairman, on which budget you would like to speak of first. I believe it's administration if we're going in order of the.
The first one we have in our book is what I consider to be the administrative and operation, which would be what a lot of people would refer to as the sheriff's office. And then the next one is the jail, and then the 911.
Okay.
So
I've got some handouts that I'm going to give you. Each year. each year I give you information. I give you information as far as they go along, to give you as much information as we can on the different line items that we have. The information that you get that is cut out by line gives you basic information of what's going on, but I want you to see in full the types of things that we are going to utilize those funds to recover. And that seemed to have been, in the past, that seems to answer a lot of questions before they're asked. We've got on the sheriff's office side, we've actually done everything that we can to minimize costs. The increases in personnel and spending, we've tried to push down in operating expenses to include capital. 4 years ago, when I came in and I was asking about vehicles, we were really hurting. We were hurting somewhat badly. All the information that we received from the community college just moments ago, we had about 30 to 36 vehicles that were in that same line of that 150 to 165,000 miles on those vehicles. Over the last 4 years, we have purchased more vehicles. We've gotten to the point now where I think it's understood that if we get 10 vehicles a year, at 70 vehicles, that on that 7th or 8th year, the vehicles are going to roll over. They're going to roll over in between that 125,000 and 150,000 miles, which is a lot less expensive to keep those vehicles up than those higher mile vehicles. And I think that has been a trend that we've seen moving forward. I made a promise that first year that every year moving forward, we're not going to have to buy 10 vehicles. Now, on the numbers that we have, and I know that you've gotten our vehicle assignment list and information that you received today, you see that it would be still a great year to receive 10 vehicles, that we can move another 10 vehicles out that are high miles. But in this budget year, we're going to really need to replace our transport van that moves inmates from the jail. That van is used to take anywhere from, most of the time, if it's 2, we put them in a patrol vehicle. But if it's 3 up to 12, we use that van, and we use that van every day that court's running. And the last handful of years, we put a lot of miles on it, and this last year, it's been in the shop no less than 3 or 4 times, at 3 or 4 weeks at a time, trying to keep it running. The engine is fine. That engine is a beast, but it's everything else that's around the vehicle that seems to have issues. But it is a 2000 Chevrolet van. It's done its job, and it's done it well for a long time, but we're spending a lot of money trying to keep it on the road now. We're looking to replace that vehicle. That's about $62,000 to replace that. So we dropped the cost down for that capital outlay for the vehicles to make it where we're going to look to purchase 6 sedans and 1 van at the tune of about $324,000 in expense, as opposed to $360,000, which would be what the cost would be for 10 vehicles. So that's really the biggest change that we've had in the sheriff's administration lines. Another source that gets talked about often is overtime. Overtime is numbers that have changed over the last handful of years. Parts of those change came about 4 years ago. We had about 12 employees at the sheriff's office that were exempt employees. And they were exempt employees in positions that didn't need to be exempt employees. And we made some of those changes, which means that they went from working tons of hours and not getting paid a dime of overtime, which, in my opinion, goes against the whole intent of the Fair Labor and Standards Act. And we put those people in positions where if they do work overtime, they get paid, they get compensated for the time that they work. So that was a change that we had in that. The majority of the overtime that you see actually is probably covers in the drug unit. That is not an 8 to 5 position. It's not 40 hours a week. So they cover a lot of overtime, and then the other overtime that we spend is through transports that are taken. And a big bump that we had this last year was when the jail was closed for about 2 months, that we spent a lot of time on the road moving inmates from wherever jail that they were to court and back in the same day. So that covered a lot of expense that we wouldn't even have known to have budgeted for last year. So those are the 2 biggest changes that we have going into that line. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to field them for you.
On that van, Charlie, You said it's about $62,000.
Yes, sir. It's roughly,
Is there any expense after you get the van as far as setting up the inside for
That-
handcuffs and things like that?
the 62,000 would be turnkey.
Okay.
It's roughly about $32,000 for the van itself, and then the other 31 or 32 would be outfitting it with the cage and all of the equipment that goes along with it, to include camera system. Some of the technological upgrades that we've had since we've had the last van in 2000, it put us in a position where it's safer for us to be on the road. We get to know more about what's going on inside the compartments, and that is a purchase that we're going to look to make through the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, since there's many jails, many transport vans that's needed. There's pre-negotiated price points through that actually saves money from even the state government contracts. And then when it comes to the equipment piece, it's the same thing, is that there's heavy competition to try to get those bids and those price points through the Sheriff's Association, and we look to use that as much as we can.
Questions of Charlie? Okay, you want to move over to the jail?
What page is that?
It's 135.
So the jail is the part of the budget that we do have some additional funds that we're going to need to request. There's some funds that we're going to talk about in safekeeping. That's the biggest line in the continuation budget. And then in tomorrow's discussion, we're going to talk about need for more personnel due to some of the code changes that goes to supervision of inmates that the law is going to change this year. So I'll leave that up to you gentlemen about how far into the discussion we get tonight, or whether that's something that we need to hold off until tomorrow. But the biggest change in the jail's budget is once again, we've looked and tried to push down as much as we possibly can and as many lines as we can. Each year in the budget process, our divisions within the office put together their budget, and that's another thing that you see in the handout that I've given you. Once we get to the point where it's a recommended budget from the manager, that budget's been pushed around and massaged and moved, and there's been negotiations and arguments, and priorities have been set agency-wide in each individual division. Then we get to the point when we're talking with the county manager and the finance office, then we look at trends over the last handful of years. Sometimes it can be an intense process. I try to give where I absolutely can, but sometimes I make Brian or Anita do something after I leave the room if they're going to change some numbers. But I think it's really been a productive conversation over the last handful of years, getting to the point where the budget's as lean as it can be, covering the needs that we have, and then hope for the best. And for the most part, we've been okay. This last year, we've had a couple of difficult lines that we've had to talk about. And safekeeping, that's one of those things that we're going to constantly have to talk about. The plan over the last handful of years has been that we knew unless something changed, unless there was some sort of change in the court system or the way that we lock people up, that we were going to have a certain amount of safekeeping that was going to get us through the day. When we decided years and years ago that we weren't going to put 125 or 130 people in that jail, and we knew that we were going to put a soft cap on that number even below the 85 when you're talking about inmate safety and officer safety, that we knew that we were going to have some safekeeping expenses. It's just a matter of how much that was going to be. In the last handful of years, we thought that was probably going to be $300,000 to $350,000. Each year, we decided at the piece that we were going to put about $150,000 in the budget, knowing that wasn't going to be enough. But looking at December and January and February, hoping that there was going to be enough money and funds elsewhere that we can move that in without having to ask for another appropriation from the county. And in some years that's worked, and in some years it hasn't. But so that starts with that uptick in appropriation that we're asking for in this budget. Yes, sir.
Chief Rose, this year we've got two line items that relates to safekeeping.
Yes, sir.
The first one is just plain safekeeping, and that number is $100,000. Then we have safekeeping slash capacity, 200,000. Do you mind walking us through what the difference is in those two line items? I know that Commissioner Richardson, I think, had asked for maybe a breakdown, a further breakdown at one of our meetings.
We did. If you'll look on page 136, about just above halfway down that page, you'll see where it's broken out. It started out professional services, medical, and you see that recommended 0. And then you'll see inmate prescriptions, inmate medical health, inmate out-of-facility services, and then inmate stop-loss insurance. So it's,
What is stop-loss insurance, Brian?
Charlie, can I- it's essentially kind of like, it's insurance on top of your insurance. For health insurance, you pay for a certain amount, and then you buy reinsurance. And essentially through the Sheriff's Association, there is a policy in place that takes us to a certain cap. And if we exceed that cap, then the other insurance takes over and pays it for us. So it's a stop loss for us to ensure that we don't get burned bad.
There's two line items that have been changed to try to add additional information to commissioners. One is the professional service medical, and that is the line that we were just speaking of. And then in safekeeping, that's also a line that started out in a conversation during one of the budget retreat sessions that we had. Commissioner Richardson was asking for more detailed information, and so we decided to break those lines down a little bit. And then we're working with the jail. We're going to be able to, on the safekeeping piece, we're going to be able to break those lines down even more to the point of, we're going to look for behavioral safekeepers, medical safekeepers, mental health safekeepers, and capacity safekeepers. So we can look to code those all in the paperwork that we have internally, and that we can actually hit with the lines to make that where you can see more of where those funds are going and for what purpose. On the professional services medical, that catastrophic medical insurance, where we ran into this year was we had 3 or 4, just really tough cases where you've got to fund these. We've got inmates that we can't just get rid of. We can't just talk to a judge and say, hey, we need these guys out of here because cost is going to be too much. We have had those in the past, and there has been situations where the situation is at the point where we can talk to a judge. They're pretrial detainees. It's it's not what would be considered a major violent crime. We can get people either on a house arrest or get them on a lower bond to get them out. But there's sometimes where you just can't do that, depending on the reason that they are being housed in your facility. We had a handful of folks this year that one, that was part of the criteria, and then two, their medical bills were very high. And we hadn't experienced that in years past. So with that, the $32,000 covers the premium for that catastrophic medical insurance piece. That goes along with the $100,000 piece of the out-of-facility services. That for the $32,000 covers the premium. If a person has to go to the hospital or has major issues, and there's a $25,000 deductible for each person. And then after that is done, it's up to $250,000 of coverage before you hit the next threshold. So over that, we talked to many other jails that do the medical, that is not tied in with any other service. So we've gotten guidance from the Sheriff's Association, from other jails that run across the same issues to try to get as much guidance as we can. Then we looked at the funds that we've had to spend this year and years in the past to come up with the budget numbers that you've got in the professional services medical, still trying to keep that down to a minimum amount of what we're talking about. And overall, we're looking at a $50,000 increase from the budgeted amount in the jail last year for professional services medical, hoping that we never have to spend a dime of it. But we want to be a little bit more proactive with what we're doing. We want to be ready for some of the issues that we have, and not have to come back and get an appropriation unless there's something that is very major that has happened time and time again this year. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that answers that question for that piece.
Very good.
Well, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Why is it necessary to have this for the medical in your budget when the health department is doing their medical? Why do we have two budgets with medical in it for the jail?
I really don't have a great answer for you. The way that we've looked at it is that we need to make sure that all of the pieces that are in place are taken care of within a budget. There was a transition between everything being in the sheriff's office budget, even though about $260,000 was just paid out in lump sum payments to an outside carrier. Through the discussions with the Board of Health and the Health Department, when we're talking about getting into this was what was most comfortable over the first budget, now the second budget when it comes to that. But I don't particularly know if there's a statutory reason that we've got anything broken out this way, but we just want to make sure that everything that needs to be covered is covered in there. There are certain situations where medical expenses are incurred without us having a direct contact, at least initially, with the health department staff. You know, sometimes that might be done over the telephone, and sometimes someone might be taken to the hospital or the emergency room with just based off of what they're seeing at the time. So I don't know if that's part of it or not, but.
Okay, the second question, do you have written guidelines for safekeeping? How that applies?
Can you give me a little bit more information?
Well,
into the
you
question?
described 3 or 4 different categories of safekeeping.
Sure.
Do you have written guidelines that define that particular safekeeping?
Not within our standard operating procedures, but that could be something that we can look into and work towards.
Okay.
Any other comments on that? Okay, you want to move into the,
Well, are we going to discuss the additional requirements for the jail during the expansion
that's the
discussion?
expansion. But we can still discuss it tonight. But the request on the additional staff for the detention center is in the expansion. It's not in what you're seeing here.
Okay. Well, the memo of February 1st, 2018, where they talk about how to handle female inmates and underage offenders, are we going to discuss that tomorrow night? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I'm ready, either tonight or tomorrow, so I'll leave that to the board.
Tomorrow night, we're really tight on time, and we're looking at about 3 to 5 minutes, so I would say that let's go ahead and discuss that right
Mr.
now.
Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. So, in reading the memo that's in our book on page 184, 184, I guess it was Ms. Bryan wrote it. It's dated February 1st, 2018.
Yes, sir.
And it talks about safekeeping, well, there's I guess, additional officers, safekeeping, and the medical library. Could we go into some discussion or detail on those 3 sections?
The three big changes that we're going to deal with within this next year is, one is dealing with raise the age, which actually, and with our facility, it's less responsibility on us. You know, with them moving the age of adults through the court system from 16 to 18, then we're actually going to have less of those offenders, and actually none of those offenders that are 17 and 16 that have to be housed separately right now in our facility. So that's going to be one change that we're really not going to have to deal with at our current facility that we have now. The two that are going to definitely affect how operations are at the jail is, one is that for the most part right now is that females that are housed in our facility, we are to try to keep them out of sight of male inmates. Sometimes that's a little bit more difficult than others, but that is where that standard is right now. You know, so when sleeping hours or nighttime hours when everybody's on lockdown, then for us to live up to that standard, you just have to keep males and females from being able to see each other. Well, part of that change in the standard is that they're going to up the standard from line of sight to sight and sound. Yeah. And that, there's a lot of facilities across the state that are going to have tons of issues with that. You know, our facility in particular is one of those that's tough where, you know, I don't know if any of you gentlemen have noticed it, but if you've ever been in our parking lot and somebody has sort of stooped down beside the building and it looks like they're talking to the building, they're not talking to the building, they're talking to an inmate on the other side of that wall. So that actually does occur, and it occurs quite often. Inside the facility, if you're talking about sight and sound, then that is going to be a major issue, compliance issue for us, because all you have to do is yell, and you can be heard by females. All female will have to do is yell, and they can be heard by the male. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to try to address and try to see how DHHS is going to deal with that new standard in our jail. The worst comes to worst would be that we're not going to be able to house females in our facility. It would have to almost be like where we have been with some of the other cases, where we get them booked in and then we get them to a facility that can actually deal with that. That's the worst case scenario for us when it comes to funds. That is the deal when we're changing with females.
Let me ask you a
Okay.
question on that one. Is there money that has been requested for this coming fiscal year in case we have to move these females off-site? Have you
That is one of the reasons that we've requested more in safekeeping
Okay.
than we had in years past for that initial. I'm still, unless something changes, I do not believe that $300,000 or $350,000 is going to cover the amount for safekeeping that we're going to have in the year unless something changes. But that is part of the thought process. And I told the county manager and the finance officer, and I will tell the commissioners that I am comfortable with whatever is decided when it comes to the budget with safekeeping. If it's decided that we start out at a number and then we have to speak throughout the course of the year, knowing that we're going to have to make another appropriation, that I'm comfortable doing that. I believe that the finance officer is probably more comfortable with making sure that number is set where we don't have to do that, and I understand that as well. So, but that is where we are on that piece.
Okay, so the other one is
Rounds, supervision.
rounds, yes, that's the section, January 16, 2018.
That is, the change in that is that right now the standard says that you have to do supervision rounds, every hour at irregular times, and then it gives a standard of what a round is. So if you look at that, the wording of how that is, if I do a round at 5:01, then technically by the law, by the guidelines that's been codified, I can almost go 2 full hours before the next round is done and still be in compliance with what the rule says. It doesn't say every 60 minutes, it says every hour at irregular times. Well, the rule change that they're going to put in effect is that it's saying that you've got to do rounds at irregular times, but they're going to have to be conducted no more than 35 minutes apart from each other. I'll tell you that it takes longer than 35 minutes to do a round if you're doing it correctly. And that's with the 60 to 70 people that we have. There's also parts and talk in the rules that the Sheriff's Association is fighting every bit that they can, because part of that rule and that they want to change is that the detention officers are going to have to go into each housing unit.
That's stupid.
And so where right now you can have one detention officer do a round and see everybody and not put themselves in unnecessary harm's way. But if you do make the detention officers go into the housing units to see everybody, then, there's no way that there's no way that I would realistically send one person in to do that job. Unless each 35 minutes you're going to lock down each individual from the day room into their cells. And my experience being in the jail, if you want to start a fight, you start locking people down without there being a justifiable reason to do that. So those changes are significant in the way that rounds are being done. If at 35 minutes, if you do a round correctly, the whole purpose of a round is to find something that you need to correct. If you find something that you need to correct, that takes that round from being 35 minutes to an hour, but that doesn't stop the clock on the rounds. That means that somebody else is going to have to start that other round within that next 35 minutes. And that is 24/7. That is 365 and 1/4 days in the year. It is nonstop, and it doesn't slow down. If you are having meals, you've got to do those rounds. If you are doing visitations, you have got to do those rounds. If you are if you're dealing with bookings and arrestees, you have got to do those rounds. And people say, all right, well, that doesn't happen a lot. That's 3 or 4 hours a day. Well, that's 3 or 4 hours during the day that you were standing the choice of being in compliance with the law or not being in compliance with the law. So that is a very significant change, and that is the very point of why we're asking for an additional FTE for each shift that we have, because that's exactly what it's going to take to go from the once an hour at a regular times to every 35 minutes at a
So
regular.
you're asking for four new jail employees?
Yes, sir.
He's not asking, the state's mandating.
Well, I understand that.
Well, it hasn't been passed
In
yet.
It
December
has not.
December of
of 18.
It's proposed.
Is it a proposal or is it law now?
It is.
I thought you said it was a rule.
It is, well, it's both. It's a rule that's defined in Department of Health and Human Services that's codified, and a state law that gives them the ability to enforce actions in detention facilities across the state.
It's a regulatory change. It's a regulation.
But it hasn't been
Not an act.
finalized.
No, it has not.
It has not been finalized.
It has
No.
not.
Question for you, Chief. If Ed was in there and he was sleeping between 12 and 6, would you have to call his name every 30 minutes or just?
Please don't.
By the nature of what a round is, we have to actually do a physical check of the person. So we're going to have to get some sort of.
You got to see his
acknowledgement.
heart.
We're going to
You
have
got
to
see
call
his-
a name. We're going to have to, make eye contact. There's going to have to be some sort of exchange. So when that detention officer walks away from that person, then they can articulate to the point that that person was okay at that particular point in time where they hit the plunger, saying that they did a round of that block.
Commissioner Lang?
This is a prime example of something that really sounds good on paper and is not practical. It's straight up stupid. And I'll say it again, this is straight up stupid. To ask an officer to go in a cell block is the dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. And I implore everybody who's listening, call Raleigh, do whatever you want to, and tell them to kill this stupidity, because that's exactly what it is. It is stupidity. And I say this from experience because I have worked in the jail during my time at the Sheriff's Department, and what they're asking these folk to do now is straight up stupid.
It's another unfunded mandate.
Commissioner Evans?
What's the purpose?
Can we quote you on that?
You can quote me on that.
Well, our attorney sent us an email today with the editorial out of the News Observer. I don't know whether everybody's had a chance to read it. Was the chief on your mailing list for the editorial? But I mean,
I don't remember seeing it. That.
but the editorial related to deaths in county jails, pretty much. So,
The reason you're having to do it is because it hasn't been done properly in the past. Then you've had these deaths in these jails. Look at our own jail, where they hung a curtain in front of the cell and let the guy go back behind the curtain and commit suicide. I mean, come on. That's the reason you're having to do it, because they haven't been doing what they're supposed to have been doing properly. That's the reason. Do you use a trustee system over there? Do you have trustees?
We do have trustees on a limited basis, but you can't, you can't put a trustee in charge of anything that would be supervisory.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah, I mean,
understand that.
I-
I understand that. But a trustee can hand out meals, a trustee does a lot of other things. There's a lot of things a trustee can do.
Yeah, and yes, we do use trustees.
are they paid or volunteers?
Well, I mean, they are inmates, so the
Oh,
only,
they're
the only benefit that they can get is that there are things in statute that says that if an inmate does do work and they are good behavior and that they do work, they can actually get sentence reductions
Okay.
based off of that job that they do.
Mr. Evans?
Why were you told that of this new rule? The purpose of it?
The purpose of a round, I will actually agree with part of what Commissioner Richardson says. If he wants to throw the operations of our jailers, under the bus, then I'll send the bus right back his way.
Well, what I said was factual, wasn't it? That's what the SBI investigation said.
If you can, which you can't show me, there's an interpretation that comes through that's other than what the black and white of the round says. That it was interpreted that we could have done rounds in a better way than what the rounds were done. but they also do not give you any indication of what better would be. They just say, we would like it better than what you're doing.
Well, I think taking a curtain down in front of the cell would do a lot. I mean,
Okay.
That's just common sense.
Well, it is not common sense, you know, but, you know,
Amazing.
there's a lot of things that you think are easy that are not easy, but there's a lot of things that, you know, I might be thinking human decency would be involved that you've got absolutely no indication that could be the case. But as far as the purpose of a round is to make sure that everybody in the facility is okay at those times that you go through. As far as the change goes, it's been many years since there's been any changes in 14J, which is the law that is the code for how jails are run. And this is the year that's coming up. So there's many things, many parts, and it's not just jails that the rules are being changed for. Just about everything under DHH's umbrella is having some sort of rules and code changes that go along with it. I sent the information to the county manager that's specific for the rounds, but I also sent them the entire document that covers the other stuff. So if anybody needed to see the original source of that information, then they could see that.
So is that the same rule for the detention center, a jail, and a prison?
Not necessarily. There are different rules and different levels of rules and laws that go for a detention facility or a county jail than would go for a prison. There are a lot of them that are going to be similar and the same, but some of them are different.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Chief, this was published, according to this memo, January 16th in the Federal Register, in the North Carolina Register. And it says here that, and then they had public hearings on March 6th, and the proposed effective date is December 1st, 2018. Have you heard any status?
Lieutenant Bryan is actually on one of the subcommittees
Okay.
that is overseeing the changes in 14J, so we're actually receiving more information than most would on that. All indication is that the supervision part is going to be a part of the code change. Okay. That's going to happen from, there's a lot of fights that's going on when it comes to the part about the round going into the housing unit. That's not just the Sheriff's Association. I believe the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners is actually involved in trying to fight that part of the provision as well. So that one, we're not getting any indication if that's going to go anywhere, but the
It also
supervision.
quotes some sections of the law here, and it also says the Office of State Budget and Management has already approved it. And that's usually an important step.
To my understanding, it's been given to the legislature.
Charlie, have you talked to any other
Thank you.
counties about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have, and
I mean, old time I heard that we gotta have some more people for the inmate, monitoring. So we gotta have 4. A county the size of, a jail the size of Pitt County probably have 45 or 50 then, wouldn't it?
yes, well, I'm not sure specifically on
I'm asking
that.
because it look like if the numbers come that big, look like the counties could get together and do something about this.
Every conversation that I've had with another jail administrator, the first 5 minutes are usually yelling back and forth, and then actually get to the point where we actually calm down and speak about the changes of that. I think we're actually, the Beaufort County is in that spot where it's going to hurt us and smaller counties more than it would what I consider the super counties, where they might have the ability to hide FTEs, where we really do not.
I got
I mean, every person that we've got working in the detention center has tasks that are stacked up all day long, every day. So if it is a Wake or Durham or Mecklenburg County, it might actually hit them a little bit less, but they're going to have more people
Because
too.
they got a place for females and stuff like that.
Oh, without a doubt on that. Yes, sir. Most of the facilities that are being built now, that a lot of these places are being built so they can actually house, whether it's juveniles or whether it's federal inmates, and the feds leave a different standard when it comes to sight and sound. So if you're building it to that standard, then these rules and changes aren't going to affect you like they would with the facility that we have.
Could we get a list by week of the actual jail population here, not the number of inmates that you have under your custody, but the actual jail population for like the last year?
Sure. I mean, we do keep up with that daily. So we could do that.
Well, we take daily. I'd take daily. If that's no work, it's just a matter of running the Xerox machine.
Okay.
Okay.
that it?
Yeah.
Any other questions on the jail? If not, let's move to the 911 Communications Center. Chief?
The communications budget had a pretty big change 2 years ago. That was one of our budgets that both the jail's budget and sheriff's office budget had to supplement over the course of the year to make sure that it made it towards the 10th and 11th and 12th month. The budget now is pretty sound. It's been pretty steady over the last 2 years. Now we're getting into the point where we're really making sure that what we have listed as supplies, we're spending on supplies, and that's been a project that we've been over the last couple of years. And we've been able to tighten up in some places. The biggest change that you'll see in the communications budget would be in maintenance contracts. 4 years ago, when Sheriff Coleman started, there wasn't any maintenance contracts that had anything to do with the 911 system. You know, everything was pay to play. If we had a problem, we made a phone call, somebody would come in. Where we saw that the biggest problems were with that would be if there was a problem that we had one vendor that serviced 3 or 4 911 centers, because that's what they do. If there was a major problem or something like a storm that affected multiple agencies, then we would end up being last on that list. So we made it a priority to try to get as many of these service things that we're going to have to do anyway into a point where there's a schedule and something that is going to be routine when we can to make sure that everything's up and running. But also when we also needed that additional help because of something breaks or we had an emergency, that we've got folks that we can call and get that and expedite that response. So that is the largest change as far as an uptick in the budget itself. And you'll see in the handout that I gave you the specifics of where those funds go. You got Carolina Recordings, pretty much every call that goes through there gets recorded, and that's done by statute. Their priority dispatch national queue that goes with emergency medical dispatch and emergency fire dispatch. Then you see the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. The 911 phone system, priority dispatch, annual maintenance, and radio maintenance, and then Wilkinson would be electrical stuff over top of it. So those are the main changes in the communications budget, if anyone has any questions.
Any questions?
All right. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I want to go back. I don't know if the question is for you, Brian, or the chief. What is the cost of the security for the courthouse vis-a-vis what the cost would be if it was in the sheriff's office? We did away with the contract. Because my understanding is that the contract's going up again on the renewal.
I remember the number in the budget's $150,000 for the outside firm.
Yeah, there's going to be an increase in that contract. Our goal is to get it on a fiscal year basis, so we've talked with them about that, asked them. They actually wanted to implement that at the beginning of this year, and we asked them if we could to get on a new fiscal year or get everything on the fiscal year. So they agreed to hold off on that until July 1. So it's going to go from, where were we last year? 145 to about 150, so about $5,000 increase.
5,000.
Yes, sir.
So if it was in the sheriff's hands, would you have any idea what that would cost? Would it be the same? Would it be more? Would it be less?
A lot more.
Actually, I don't think a lot more. I think actually the conversations, and I don't want to speak for Charlie, but the conversations we've had is that we believe it could be done for that cost, that it wouldn't cost you anything additional. Am I speaking out of turn?
I think if we looked at the $40,000 per deputy to cover salary plus fringe benefit, then that would put us at the 160 to give us 4 deputies, as opposed to, I believe, the 5 personnel that they've got. But then the benefit on that would be that they are sworn law enforcement officers with the power of arrest. And then when court's not in session, then we can use those people as deputies to do transports and actually to supplement the bailiff corps, which we would.
So how about cars?
While you're thinking about that, We've already extended this contract for 12 months?
No, we're currently what we're trying to do is get it on the fiscal year. So they've agreed to let us get it on the fiscal year.
Until January, I mean,
Well, it starts July 1
okay.
to June 30th.
But I thought the contract was expiring, is it December?
No, it was a February contract end, I believe, and they agreed to allow us to go to July 1 at the same rate
Okay.
so that we could get on the fiscal year. Our thought was that we would go at least one more fiscal year because Charlie can't magically snap his fingers and put people in place. And if we were to do that, we would give notice, and then that last half of the fiscal year, they would get ready and be able to step in if that worked.
The
And-
contract's gonna almost double if the sheriff does it.
I don't know how I would figure that. Talking $160,000 for, if they have an automobile, after the first year, the cost drops back down again.
I think in the conversations that we've had, which has been very, very loose, there hasn't been a lot of conversation that we've had about it is that if we're talking school resource officers and the number that was provided for that was everything that first year. But, we've also had conversations of, and a lot of this stuff is sort of stepping out on faith. As long as we sort of can maintain the level of funds that we've received for the vehicles that we have over the last 3 or 4 years, if we were to absorb positions in the courthouse, then we can do that in the normal flow of vehicle purchase, and it would catch up with itself over the first couple of years.
What's a school resource officer? What were we saying a school resource officer was without the car? Just the annual on that?
The first year, it's like 95,
Just salary and benefits, 57.8.
See?
but then the
But you got,
equipment,
multiply 60 times 4, you got 240,000. Then you got to maintain a car for him. So you're getting close to what I said, $300,000.
The only difference with that, Commissioner Richards, is the salary point for a school resource officer is higher than that of a bailiff. That came about several years ago. It was tough for us to find people that were experienced enough and qualified enough that we could recruit and retain at our sheriff's office as school resource officers. So with that being said,
What's a
those
bailiff?
deputies get paid more than school resource officers.
What's a bailiff?
The bailiffs they start out around 34, and the school resource officers start out at around 40.
6,000. You're still pumping, by the time you do all of the overheads and all of the insurance and all the other stuff that goes with this, you're still pushing 300,000. Any way you look at it.
well, I think the question just came up for some comments, but it's not been in the budget, proposed budget at this point in time. We're using the
Now,
same service
I
again.
just had a question for clarification, based upon the qualifications, and
The-
also.
The sheriff's position on this really hasn't changed from the beginning. His argument actually goes to the point of, he doesn't really know if we need it 100%. But if we are going to have it, then it makes more sense that we have it than what we're doing right now. If it runs across a situation where they are needing law enforcement assistance, then they've got to do just like everybody else does, and that's call 911. And that's the biggest difference that we get. So that, for a comparison piece, that is where we're on that. But
And that's a good point to introduce our next speaker. When you say call 911.
Thanks, Charlie.
Well, actually, that's your responsibility. I'm sorry.
every now and then.
Arnie?
Sort of blurred in.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It is the second budget process in which I get to stand before you. And it's been fun at times already and already not been fun at times. But going through the preliminaries and putting things together and working with Anita and Manager Alligood to bring a continuation budget. And I'll be presenting 3 different budgets for you today: EMS, emergency management, and animal control. And with that, I'll just start off and let you lead me of exactly where you'd like to go.
Well, why don't we take the first one there in our book is the EMS service budget on 142, page 142.
Okay.
Questions of Carney? Carney, I have one, and this is kind of a follow-up as it relates to overtime. And what I think is that anytime you're trying to operate or have coverage for 24/7, 365, it appears to me that overtime, as it relates to total salaries, is almost 20%, between 15 and 20%, when you're trying to make sure coverage is there.
I can tell you for our budget, the way shift works, we operate 4 shifts, and our full-time employees get a standard overtime already. In other words, they work more than 40 hours in a week. So even on the 4 shifts of them just working their normal days, there's a standard overtime that's in that OT line, okay? The standard piece of that for our employees is right at $150,000. So there's $150,000 of overtime taken out right at the get-go. So when you look at what we had last year in our budget, which I believe was $225,000, $150 of it is going out as standard salary. I consider it that way, even though it is classified past the 40 hours. That's why it's in the overtime, okay? So when we look at that, we're a new system still. We're still growing in our operating cost. We don't have a vacation position. It's unlike, other departments that decide somebody to take a vacation. It may be okay for that person not to be there. If one of our people takes a vacation, then somebody's got to be there. So there's a guarantee that vacations are going to take place. We do limit the number of slots that we allow to take vacation, but even if you just took one a day, as you look at that, then that's an overtime cost or part-time cost of somebody coming in. And so when we looked at that, you see our budget is out of whack this year. Commissioner Richardson had asked, in a couple of commission meetings ago, exactly what we do to try to combat that. What we've put in place is a mandatory recall of part-time employees first. And that's voluntary. We can't mandate them to come in, but that's where we go to look to fill a slot now is part-time employees. If we can't find that part-time employee, then we will look for full-time employees, but in the immediate where we are, because we're so out of whack. If it's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, I'm actually taking the shift supervisor, putting in the spot wherever there's an opening of a person not being in, and either Glenn or Chris are operating as the medic 3, along with their other staff positions. It's not ideal at all, but I'm trying to help in whatever way I can. As we look moving in, we think we have a plan that's going to help curtail the overtime number. But what I'm asking for, the increase of $75,000, is very accurate for that. I have talked with Manager Alligood about this idea. We've looked at a plan of looking at Monday through Thursday of going ahead. If I've got the numbers that show typically between 3/4 to 7/8 of our month is requiring another person to come in and work, okay? So that's spots we've got to fill every shift day that we're looking at. The problem with our part-time employees, when we're calling them last minute, those guys are looking to work somewhere, and they're already assigned to go work somewhere else. So we're calling them, but they've already picked up to go work somewhere else. So we want to go out a quarter in advance and say, we've got a spot, it's guaranteed for you to work, you get to go ahead and sign up 2 months in advance. We want to start this in our July timeframe, so July, August and September, where we could go ahead and fill as many possible with part-time over our weekend times, that'd be Thursday through Sunday, and then rely on our full-time employees working overtime Monday through Thursday. The way we've come up with that plan, we've kicked it around a whole lot. Some of our full-time employees do rely on making some overtime because of their base salary, and we don't have enough part-time to do it completely. So if we were to look at those numbers, you take our current full-time staff on their standard overtimes, $150,000. My thing went to the wrong page. Give me just a second here.
Well, you've got a total of 300, and what I heard you say is 150 is for,
150 of that is just part of the standard employees' overtime. They're going to get that just for working because their hours are going to exceed the 40 hours in a
so
work.
there's another 150 on top of that truly is what we would call overtime.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And if we look at that plan, that proposal of combining part-time along with the overtime, doing it the way we're looking at, filling that one spot, going ahead and scheduling it out where we know we've got that person, you're talking about in part-time using $53,244 a year and another full-time of 119. So that brings us total, I know I'm rattling numbers off at you, at being 322,000. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute, you still don't have that because we're going to 300. If you add our part-time in there too, that leaves us a variance of about $28,000 a year left for additional overtime. That's not much. That's combining my part-time salary along with the overtime budget, but I'm using those in conjunction of these numbers. And that leaves us for times of storms or times that we have, more than one person out to be able to fill that, and we'd like to try to operate under that. So there is an increase. I believe that's the big increase is as we were getting started, we just didn't know exactly where we'd be, and we see we needed more, and so we're trying to be good stewards and come with an accurate number for that.
Other questions of Carney on EMS? If not, you want to go into emergency management?
All right. Really nothing spectacular as we look at emergency management for me to bring forward to you. Again, I'll answer any questions you may have on there. The one thing I thought of going through this budget, it is a base maintained budget. There is a replacement of a vehicle, an 11-year-old vehicle that's in there. You see that at the bottom for $35,000 in capital outlay, but that is a replacement of a current vehicle. And what I had talked to you about in the budget workshops and would still like to do is actually the vehicle is a Toyota vehicle. It's getting about 122,000 miles on it now, I think, because it's still actively being used. We are, because of the age, it's getting 11 years, getting ready to go into 12 years. We don't want that vehicle to have a potential to be an emergency response vehicle. We do think it still has a good year or two left on it, and so I'd like to really transfer that vehicle, instead of it going out, it transfer into the animal control department, where we won't have an emergency response, but the vehicle would still be used for another couple of years.
Questions? If not, you want to move into the animal control and tell us about the new kitty cat kennels, stainless steel.
How did I know a $25,000 increase would bring a question there?
Well, Brian had already talked to us about that. He'd already prepared us, Carney.
Yes, it is not a system expansion, it is maintaining. What we have in what is considered our feral cat room is the original cages. They're hand-built, they're wood that are covered with laminate, just like your countertop in front of you there. Because of what has to be done and just the animals that are in the cages, sometimes their own usage of the area, but along with the cleaning that has to take place every day, sometimes several times a day, the laminate starts to separate. Our guys will go to Lowe's, they'll get some contact cement and get it all put back in, but it's starting to have just some wear and tear to it. They're wood, those things are coming apart, and the inspector has got on us a few times about the condition of those cages particular. So we looked at replacing. We can replace what we have at about half to three-quarter of this cost in between that, but then it's another temporary fix. So what you see here is a request for $25,000. This is actually bringing in stainless steel cages. We can't imagine the expiration of these, to be honest with you. I mean, they're complete stainless steel. All the hardware on them is stainless steel. There's a better design to them. It actually gives us more cages. That's not the reason we're asking for them, but we are going to capitalize on that as we can. And it'll go from 8 cages, which are considered double cages. That's kind of a play on words. They're double cages, but you can only still put animals in in one of those. So it carries us from being able to have 8 runs to being able to have 18 in the same space that we have. And even though it is expensive on these cages, it's more expensive to go with the stainless steel. The reason for that is we don't see that we'll have to replace those, that they should last a lot longer than 5 or 8 years in the replacement cycle of the wood.
Are they screwed together or welded together?
They're actually, they stand 3 high. They're on coasters and they're welded together, so it's a unit. The other great thing about that currently, our cages they're not on wheels. They have to be physically picked up and moved because they have to get under them at different times and things. These cages will be on wheels. We can actually roll them out to clean the whole room. There's a lot of benefits to them for our officers as well. But the biggest thing on that price is the longevity of the cages.
You did a good job answering that on the cages.
That's my job
Yeah.
today.
Any more questions of Carney? If not, thank you very much. Brian, you want to talk about forestry and other emergency services?
I will. On page 147, you see the Forestry Administration. That's through the contract we have with North Carolina Forestry Service. They give us a budget each year based on what they anticipate, based on changes they see at the state. It is up a little bit from where it was previously, but essentially they give us that, and then unless there's a big fire, we typically are okay. So we don't anticipate using that. I think you can see, if you look at 16, 17 actuals, like 119. So it all depends upon whether they have a big fire or not.
Any questions on the forestry service piece about other emergency services?
The other emergency services include the Sydney Dive Team, the volunteer fire safety house, and the medical examiner. I think there is a service expansion in there for the Sydney Dive Team because they're asking for some additional funding, but this is their continuation piece that they've always gotten throughout the years of $10,000. We have historically put in $3,500 to the fire safety house, and then we had talked previously about the medical examiner. The county is required to pay for medical examiner cases, and we have seen an uptick in those cases. Typically any unattended out-of-hospital death becomes a medical examiner case, and the county is required to fund that. So it all depends, and we've seen an uptick in those, so we've added some additional funding in there. But that's what it would be used for.
Anyone have any questions on other emergency service? Okay, you want to move into, is the next one special revenues?
It is, yes, sir. So this is a special revenue category, and these are funds that are restricted. It starts on page 151, the 911 telephone system. You'll see, so if you flip over, 151 kind of gives you the description about the funds, the special funds. And then on page 153, you'll see the revenue side of it, and then on 152, you'll see the revenue side, and then on 153, you'll see the expenditure side. So I guess the big piece of that is the 911 funds, as Charlie mentioned, when you say restricted funds, they are absolutely restricted. We get grilled on those in everything that we do, and the 911 board looks at those, and they audit them, and they go through them, and we have to fuss and fight every year about what we can and can't do, because it seems to change every year, and it's not that it's getting broader, it's getting smaller. So that's what that is, $189,000. It comes through the state grant, and you'll see that we've matched that out on page 153 on the expenditure side. The seeds funds revenue is made up of the unauthorized substance tax piece. Charlie, you want to talk about any of that? It's the seized funds that come in. We're showing appropriating some fund balance out of that to make it a total of $100,000, and then authorizing an expenditure of equipment under those funds by $100,000.
What are we gonna buy with that $100,000?
This year, if, just to give you some summary of what we did, the original appropriation was about $165,000, I believe. Out of that, we spent in between $60,000 and $70,000 is what we're going to look to spend this year. And that mostly covers equipment that is specifically used by our drug unit. When it comes to whether it's trackers, that we can put GPS trackers, whether it's cameras, whether it's surveillance equipment, whether it's night vision. Those are the things that we look to upgrade this year. We didn't do the night vision, but we're looking to do that next year. And this appropriation that we're looking at is $100,000. We're looking to upgrade night vision. That the stuff that we have now is about 15 to 20 years old. And we're looking to the handguns that the sheriff's office is running. Is we're over 10 years old with the M&Ps. The night sights are starting to go to the point where they're no good anymore. So it's time to purchase new handguns, and we would like to use the drug asset forfeiture to purchase new handguns and all of the equipment that goes with that. So holsters, mag pouches, lights that go on the guns, things like that. And that itself up front is going to look like it's going to be about $60,000. And then when the trade-in of the guns that we have will bring that price down, but we're looking to do that with the drug asset forfeiture money this year.
Any other questions on that? All right.
The next piece is the fire tax district revenues, and then you'll see the expenditure on the other side. They break out into Richlands Fire Rescue, which is a combined one, Chocowinity, and then north side. Remember, everything on the north side of the river is combined. Because of, and Carney's had some conversations with the fire chiefs, because of the tax values, the 2018 revaluation, those numbers have gone down. There's been some discussion amongst the chiefs as to whether they would like for the board to consider adjusting that tax rate to a revenue-neutral tax rate. Because right now, the way it sits, because the valuation went down, their tax rate is staying the same, their levy is going to go down. So what they're interested in, and Carney's got a meeting with them to finalize tomorrow, they may ask you, will you adjust their levy to neutral so that they bring in the same amount of revenue? Otherwise, they're going to be short.
I talked with Manager Alligood about that earlier today as we were talking with the fire chiefs, and there is a concern. What happened, their budgets were all submitted based on the best value they had, which would have been last year. And our final estimates coming in of what that reevaluation was going to be was after those budgets have come in, so it's going to show a shortfall. And specifically the north side, it covers numerous departments, the north side fire tax. We are meeting with them on Wednesday night, and there's an expectation that of that group that they are going to ask for me to come back, or them to come back, me come as a representative on Thursday night and ask for a revenue neutral adjustment on that.
Refresh me, what is that tax now? Is it 3.9?
375 currently.
3.75, so that can be adjusted.
The fire tax can, yes.
Because we're at the max on EMS.
Every department, I believe, except Long Acre EMS District is maxed out.
Is maxed out
So
on
no
the
one
fine.
can change on that but Long Acre.
So you're going to bring that back to us, I'm assuming?
Yes.
So EMS is the same piece, and like you've just mentioned, there's only one district out there that's not at the maximum 5 cent already. And I think indications are right now, we don't anticipate that one adjusting. Still waiting on the conversation. The next one is the tax reevaluation. Again, that's what we talked about previously. That is where funds are set aside by statute to do the next reevaluation. So for 8 years, you're going to start setting money aside. One of the things that I know Parker would be interested in talking to the board about, and we can certainly do that after we get through budget, is for the board to consider whether you want to stay on an 8-year reevaluation cycle, or whether you want to try to decrease that time frame. So he'd be interested in having that conversation with you once we get through some things and look at the pros and cons of that. Maybe even the opportunity to be able to do it in-house with some additional appraisers in-house and not have to contract out to do it. But so be on the lookout for that. We'll have those conversations in the future. But you got to be careful. I mean, I know y'all dealt with that in 2010. You start, once you bump up against that 8-year, you're stuck. You have to revalue. If you break it back a little bit and say we're gonna do it every 6 years, it does adjust the figure a little bit. But then it gives you a couple years to play, and you can say, well, maybe we don't want to revalue, or yes, we do. It gives you that flexibility if you need to have that flexibility. But anyway.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have one question. Has there been any discussion, or have you heard anything about a negative impact on the EMS program? Whether it's the county or the individual non-county operations?
I don't understand your question.
On EMS, Emergency Management Service, I know we're at a max of 5, we can't raise it. Has there been any comments made that the reevaluation is going to have a negative impact on any of those units?
Well, obviously, their money's gonna go down, and there's gonna be an impact from that, but there's not much that can be done. There's no request to come because they can't go over 5. So that request, but yes, I mean, every one of those, every agency that is getting tax money is now gonna get less. There's an impact there.
Nobody's raised it.
Well, I don't know that we necessarily have the final numbers yet to know what that's going to be. They're actually still getting in some business personal property into the system. So we're not definite on what that final number is yet. And what we've said is it may just be one of those years where we just kind of have to try to hold and see what we have.
All right, thank you.
Well, the total number for all of the EMS districts, revenue's down 165,000.
Yeah, but it's a subsidized thing, so taxpayers just make up the difference. It's a moot point.
No,
You know,
it's
the
not a-
revenue will come
no, it's not.
down.
No, it's not a moot point.
Why? Explain it.
Even though it's maxed at the tax, what we'd have to consider if it begins to impact, do we have to add a general fund into the county EMS program or into an individual program? Or, there could be downside.
Well, I think that is a question that comes up, but we won't know until we get into it.
Yeah.
And there's some opportunities with countywide billing to help drive some of those costs down and to try to help maximize some of those returns.
Because that
So-
brings in about 150,000, doesn't it, the countywide billing? Was it 150?
No, 75 to 100.
We had a conservative estimate of going off the the Medicaid reimbursement money. That fund, we think, in past of a similar county, around 75,000 to 100,000.
Okay, and-
But in addition, you're gonna have two departments, we'll be billing for now that haven't been billing in the
Yeah,
past.
yeah. No, and I agree with what you're saying. It's too soon to know, but it's just something to put in the back of our mind.
But if you make the changes that you're alluding to, if you decide not to fund that, then you're gonna have to change your policy of full service 24/7. I didn't realize you were talking about doing away with part of EMS.
I didn't say-
We're not
You're
doing
talking
that.
about not funding it, so how
I
are you
did
gonna?
not say anything about non-funding it.
All right, children.
You said there were consequences. The only consequences are money. You've promised to fund it regardless.
Well, let's go back. The EMS tax revenue for all of the districts is down 165,000. We're going to pick up some additional money because of countywide billing, but in addition to that, 2 of the departments is going to pick up additional money that's not in that.
Yeah, and then we have
So-
the assessed valuation, so
But it is a point that,
it's just something to think about.
Yeah, during the
Be
next 12
prepared for it,
months.
Just in case we have to address it.
all right, Brian?
The Economic Development Fund, that is where you'll see on page 153, it's $80,000. That's $35,000 for the industry-ready building payment that the board committed to in the next fiscal year. And then the airport tax grant, airport
De-annexation.
de-annexation payment,
Yeah.
contract payment.
Make you whole.
Right. The next is the Capital Reserve Fund for the voting machines. The board approved. This is the second year where you're putting money aside to replace voting machines when they need to be replaced. I think it was a 5-year cycle, so you're in year 2 of that. And then the Home Community Care Block Grant for aging. These are funds that come in from the state, and then they're distributed based on the different areas. I think they talked a little bit, DSS talked a little bit about that last meeting.
Yes.
So.
Okay, the emergency telephone system fund, is that next?
That is the detail on the 911 surcharge, the 189, that gives you the breakdown. It's on page 156 or 155, you get the history and kind of the background on it. And then 156 is actually the line item budget that talks specifically about where things are going, whether it's charging out for telephone software maintenance or, training costs, those kind of things. And then 157 is the drug seizure that Charlie was talking about, and then on 159 is actually the description.
You talk about 157 up the top of the page, drug seizures, it talks about appropriated fund balance. That, whose fund balance?
In that fund, in that restricted fund.
Oh, you have the money in the fund, okay, I got you.
That's what I thought it was, but I wasn't sure.
It's restricted money, so it's a restricted fund balance appropriation out of that fund.
Brian, or Chief, refresh me, what is the annual cash roughly that's coming in? Because that fund builds up. It's not $50,000 on an annual basis, is it?
Yes.
So we're pulling in. So that's how we build it up to, was it 165?
I think it was 168 or 70.
Okay,
yeah.
and we've pulled that down.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be, that's we're basing work of years ago. That it's going to take delay for us to get that. We have pretty steady at the numbers that we've been getting, and we've got a lot of major cases that have been made over the last handful of years that we're going to receive funds for those things, but it's not just not in the same number that we do.
Is that it?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay, you want to introduce our next speaker?
Christina Smith. We're going to be talking about the water department. And just kind of to tee that up, we are in the process, we have built this budget around consolidation of the districts into a single operating entity. And all of that breaks down. And then you'll also see attached in this the capital program that Christine and her staff put together and was incorporated into the rate study. Never had a rate study done before. That rate study ends up on page, behind page 164, the second one behind page 164 that folds out and gives you the actual rates of what we anticipate the consolidation of those. As you recall, we go from multiple rates across the county down to a single rate. That single rate would be phased in over 5 years across the individual districts. So at the end of 5 years, those rates would equal the same. We originally ran it on like 5,000 gallons, and Christine and her group came back and reran the numbers so that we could get a true average of what the average water customer in our system was using a month, and that was 3,300 gallons a month. So we reset that rate structure so that you can see in that what we would anticipate that rate being, or that bill being per month in each of those districts based on 3,300, which is the average being drawn by a residential customer. And you'll see how that moves up or moves down. There's one district that it moves down a little bit, the rest of the districts, they move up a little bit. But they all become uniform after 5 years. Christina can talk to you about any of the specific details on the budget that you may have, but that's big picture for us.
Questions of Christina?
I don't know if you want to jump into the expenditures. I will point out, just kind of as an overall, if you're looking at the approved budget for fiscal year 2018 versus the recommended budget for 2019, there is a reduction of $15,255,000 from last year's budget to this year's budget. We have For those of you that have been on the board for a few years, you've seen us trying to improve infrastructure, trying to improve the buildings, trying to improve the equipment, and to upgrade and to fix needed repairs that needed to be done. We are doing that, so what you will see in this year's budget, some of the numbers are decreasing, some of the equipment purchase numbers are decreasing and that type of thing. So we appreciate the funding the past few years, and again, we're just trying to continue that same high level of service. But again, it is a reduction from last year.
Christina, I just passed out the handout that I sent to you and Brian and Anita. Today, I took the major expenses, and at the top of the page, and with the big items, it just went down and just took the number of customers. We have 13,174. And if you look all the way over to the far right corner, I was really curious about what the debt service was, the average debt service per month. And that number is $17.36 for 13,000 customers. And then you can see the other breakdown. So before we transfer money to the fund balance in the water, that average cost is $43.92 per month. And this is just taking all of them. I mean, it's not trying to look at commercial versus residential or anything. And this first number, $7,322,000, is the same thing that she has in her total budget.
So if I could draw your attention to Table 4, this is the second fold out in the book. This is the rate study that was done. And this rate study includes all of the capital, all of the CIP. All the CIP was built into that, so that we're now charging a rate that is appropriate to support our system and keep our system repaired and in good condition over the next 10 years. It also includes the AMI project in there and everything that's needed. And what you will see is, again, it's based on a charge of 3,300 gallons per customer, which is the average across the system. And it breaks it down by the district. So we've labeled the districts. That was one of the questions somebody said, make sure you put the names in there so we know where they are. The district that we all knew was essentially being subsidized very heavily was District 2, Bunyan and River Road. Their rates, and we've heard people, their comments about the rates going up. Rates are always going to go up. There's no way that the rates can't go up. They've got to cover the cost, and the costs are increasing. But to do this project, to do this whole thing, and the worst case scenario you see is in District 2, and that's going up $11.58. That's over 5 years. So that rate will transfer in, and it'll start where it is right now, at $34.86, and it'll end up at $46.44. It's an increase of $11.58, but that's $2.32 a year. Is what the increase is. And then you'll see how those shake out across each of the districts. They range from a low, District 5 is going to drop a little bit simply because they're paying a really high rate. They'll decrease by 56 cents when it's all said and done across 5 years. And then it ranges from 78 cents a year to $1.79 a year to 31 cents to $2.32 a year to 61 cents a year. So that's the phase-in period. We looked at, had some conversations with our consultant about that and what kind of time frame we ought to look at. And with the board, we talked a little bit about, you didn't want to bring it in too fast, but you also didn't want to bring it in too slow. And the 5-year phase-in was about where we felt like it needed to be. And a lot of these, you get into some of these rate differences, and my estimate to you would be that you would never notice it simply because of the fluctuation in the amount of water you use every month to begin with. When you have a 61-cent change, you're just not going to see that. It's almost impossible to see.
Brian and Christina, Washington Park residents receive a $4.75 credit against their minimum bill. Explain that to me.
That goes back to the original purchase, or the original purchase agreement. Commissioner Richardson may have some history on this, but going back and reading through the agreements when the county was developing the water system, Washington Park already had pipes in the ground.
Oh, okay, I got
So
it,
the
I got
county
it.
took that over, and so that was a credit for the pipes in the ground.
How long does that last?
There is no expiration on that agreement that I can recall. I'll go back and double check that, but it's a flat, it doesn't increase. It's still the same.
No, I don't remember any of that.
Well, I've got a question as it relates to the Hyde County deal that went with Beaufort County, because Hyde County is where I get my water. Is that forever, or is that like a 25-year agreement? Has anybody looked at that?
I have never seen an agreement between Hyde County and
I
Beaufort
don't
County.
remember, that's right. I don't ever remember Beaufort County relinquishing part of our water districts to Hyde County.
Okay.
Now, we did the Eastern Pines out in Pitt County on some stuff on the other side of Chalkawinity. But I don't remember ever relinquishing.
Now, if I understand it correctly, on Highway 99, there is a connector between the two
Yes,
water
sir.
system.
We do have an interconnect with Hyde County. It is one of the few interconnects that we have. That's actually some of the capital projects that we're looking to improve the system in the future. I would love to have interconnects with Craven County, Martin County, Eastern Pines, Pamlico County, so that if we were to have a disaster at our treatment plant, then we would be able to open those interconnects and be able to provide water to the customers of Beaufort County.
I got one more question, and then I'll stop on the water. The water purchase, $740,000, is that all with the city of Washington? Is that
Yes,
that
sir.
deal?
That's the only place we buy water.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right, you want to go right over into solid waste?
Page 169. High level is that the rate is staying the same. We do want to have some conversations with you. Once we get through the budget process on some planning, Christina's put in her service expansion request to request an analysis to do a study of the system. Quite honestly, we have a lot of convenience sites. We have too many convenience sites.
Too many what, Brian?
We have too many convenience sites. I know it's nice and it's convenient to be able to only ride 5 minutes to get to a site, but we got a lot of sites and we're spending a whole lot of money. And we need to look at those to make sure that we're able to maximize the density. And I mean, I think what the board needs to look at and what Christina will be able to help us with if y'all approve this, this search expansion, this consultant, for having a consultant look at it, is what is the drive time you want to establish for a customer? You know, what is a reasonable drive time? Is it 10 minutes? You know, you start getting a little far out when you get 15 or 20 minutes, but it's 10 minutes. And then you take those circles and you put them on the map, and then you look at areas where it's best to put those convenience sites, instead of having I think once you look at it, we'll be able to realize some savings, some significant savings in the number of sites we have, and not necessarily have that big an impact on service delivery.
I tell you, Brian, you get ready to open up a can of worms.
Yes,
you
he
ain't gonna be able to eat.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, but you're gonna have to pay for it.
Well, I understand that too.
So,
but
so.
You're talking
so
about
once you-
moving these sites that have been there for years and years and years, and people are just a part of their life.
I understand that, and that's fine. If you want to keep them exactly where they are, the rates are just gonna have to go up.
I've got 3 sites within 20 minutes of me, 3 different sites.
I don't have a problem with looking, but I want to see some modern sites. We've got a bunch of junky sites that are hard to use,
That one down there was
inefficient.
terrible.
And I think
that's
that-
part of
part of
what
it.
you can do. When you look at this big picture, you can say, well, let's take two of these junky sites and let's close it, and let's put this one right here that'll serve both of those and make it a convenient, a
Make it
modern,
convenient.
convenient site where it's easy to dump stuff, it's easy to compact stuff, because that's a big issue for us. I mean, being able to move fully loaded containers and have them compacted so that we're maximizing and we're not paying for air. You know, we want to be able to do those things. But I agree with you, Commissioner Wren, folks don't like change. Nobody ever likes change, you know, what they say, only babies like change. There are going to be some issues there, we
They gotta
recognize.
have permission now, did you you see that, where that radical said that babies should give permission to change their diaper?
Let's get back to the budget. Let's get back to the budget. Any other questions of Christina? Okay. Okay, Brian, tell us what we're going to do tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night, I'm sorry about that, I was just sending emails back and forth with Dr. Phillips. He's working on getting a priority on capital expenditures.
Oh, yeah.
Tomorrow night, you'll have essentially the expansion portion of the budget for you to consider if you want to do that. You have, first of all, you'll have internal departments, the county departments that will come in and talk to you about any expansion programs they may have. We'll talk to you about the expansion programs that we put in there that talk about like schools, SROs, school security infrastructure, the pay and classification plan that the board had done. We'll talk to you about those. And then we'll get into the outside agencies. And the way that works with the outside agencies is if it is a new entity that's looking for money, they've got to come and start from scratch. If it is an existing entity that you're already funding, if they ask for anything above what they got last year, they're going to have to come and justify it to you, and you're going to have to agree to that or disagree to it. We have simply shown exactly what you did last year in this budget.
Is it okay with the commissioners if we tell our speakers tomorrow night that at the end of 5 minutes?
We've told them 3 to 5.
I'd give them 3 minutes. 5 minutes is a long.
Well, when I say 5 minutes, it includes the questions that you guys may
Well,
ask.
it's 3 minutes for them to speak and 2 minutes for questions. Let's put it that
They
way.
can't ask us for $5,000 in 3 minutes, they don't need.
And
that.
justify it, they don't need it.
But didn't the county manager tell them 3 to 5 minutes?
Okay, so tomorrow night, everybody's in agreement if I tell them up front 3 minutes and then
2 minutes of
2
questions.
minutes for questions.
But he, Brian, did you tell him 3 to 5 minutes?
Very clear.
So he told him 3 to 5 minutes.
And that's it.
Well, 5 minutes is total
Yeah.
for
total.
questions and everything.
Everybody realizes this is going to be a long night.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we just said, for the number of people we got listed, at 5 minutes, it's 3 hours worth of work. So you'll have a crowd full, and, the room will be full, and people will make their pitch, and it's, it'll be up to y'all to say, okay, we heard you, because folks people are passionate about what they.
Right. But our county staff, we've had pretty good dialogue tonight, so I think if you will set the example, maybe they'll follow through with that. I mean, Ron's already asked all these questions tonight.
He's good. You gonna be back tomorrow night for any reason?
Yes, sir. I'll be here tomorrow night and Thursday.
Everybody can have what they want.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
You got it.
Second, all in favor?
No.
Continue.
Recess.
Okay, I back up.
Motion to recess.
I'm glad you're here, Katie. So we will recess until 5 o'clock tomorrow night.